So today, as I was going out for coffee, I decided to check out a new cafe that just opened. As I approached the door, I was surprised and happy to see an ex-girlfriend of mine from when I was a kid. We stared at each other for a second, and then I saw her mumble something before coming toward me. I went in for a hug, and after we greeted, she simply asked, "Do you remember what you did to me?" And I was baffled. We had dated many years ago and never had any issues of any kind. No major fights, no abuse, no toxicity. In fact, she left me because I wouldn't commit, but we remained on good terms for a while afterward, still hanging out until she found a job abroad and left. At first, I was scared out of my mind and immediately sensed something very strange. I asked her to be more specific, but she wasn't forthcoming, and after a little chit-chat, she told me that she was referring to the time when my friend and I cleansed her house. It then came back to me at the time, we were some stupid, edgy, semi-goth kids who were really into weird and otherworldly stuff. And after she complained about her house feeling strange, a friend from our group offered to perform a cleansing ritual, which he did while we were basically half drunk. According to her, when she talked about this years later with other people, things started to go wrong. She began to feel a presence around the house, experienced drops in temperature, all that eerie stuff. She was vague, but apparently she believes some kind of ghost is now haunting her house, something that was unleashed after the ritual and started manifesting after she mentioned it to her friends. Nothing happened in years prior. She eventually returned to England, but promptly came back here to escape from an abusive fiancé. At that point, I was really nervous and made an excuse to leave, and she hugged me, said there is now only Christ in her heart, and suggested that we should really have a cup of coffee. And this gave me a really weird vibe, like something from a cult. I basically ran away, terrified. Keep in mind, we split on some very good terms. She looked after my dog while I was in England. As a masseuse, she took care of my bad back for months. She even introduced me to her new boyfriend, and we went out for dinner a couple of times as a group. There's no way that she could have held any animosity toward me. In fact, once she was abroad, she even offered to help me find a job in the city where she was living. This was not a prank to get back at me. And more than that, her eyes. She was once the light of the room, always laughing and cracking jokes. But the person I saw today was sad, with very still eyes, not smiling or anything, like a completely different person. I live in a very rural area in Tennessee, and this happened either in the summer of 92 or 93, so I was a preteen, and I can still see this in my mind like it happened yesterday. Like I said before, a rural area in Tennessee where we used to have some serious issues with people dumping unwanted, worn-out items and garbage down on our beautiful hillsides and ravines. At that time, it was common to find illegal dumping sites everywhere because there was no bulk pickup offered by our one waste disposal monopoly. And in this part of the state, the economic disparity is obvious. You have some of the poorest people and some multiple mansion and vacation home folks. My family fell somewhere in the upper middle class. Thinking Titanic, we would be in either the lowest rung of first class or the very top of second class. Unfortunately, the majority would be in steerage or the coal bunker. Well, it was August in Tennessee, aka sun-scorching heat and enough humidity to make it slightly uncomfortable to breathe. Many describe it as the swamp-ass capital of the state. Anyway, we had just had an extraordinarily rare murder in our county. It was all that anyone was talking about, and it was all you heard in our churches and beauty salons. The victim was largely unknown, a woman in her early 30s and nowhere near wealthy. I didn't know her, nor did anyone. She had just moved here less than a year ago and kept to herself and had not been reported missing. Then just before our summer break came to an end, this lady was found at the base of a steep incline, deep in one of our densely wooded areas by some folks out for a nature hike. And there she was found, at the base of a large illegal dump on a winding dirt road that was barely wide enough for one vehicle. If you ever met another car, one would have to pull over so far you were almost off the road entirely. Even creepier, the road was named Bone Road. Yeah. When she was found, she had lost everything from the neck up, but both her upper and lower areas were recovered, and her killer had not been caught. So my mom was born and raised here and was of a strong yet goofy stock. She had always been my best buddy, even when dropping the hammer on my brother and me, and she was loved by every student that she had ever taught. Our friends adored my goofy mama and often telling me how lucky I was to have her. My dad was a pharmacist in our area, smarter than most, and happy to go fill a lost or forgotten prescription even late into the night. My dad isn't from here, but is very well known because of his job. Everyone knows my mama because she and most of our huge family have been here since our ancestors settled here in the 1800s. The rest of her family lived in Middle Tennessee. On that day in August, we had been in a family reunion picnic at the beautiful naturally made lake that we lived near. Suddenly, a scattered thunderstorm had popped up and brought our get-together to an end. It was just me and my mom, but on the ride home, we decided that we were Sherlock Holmes and Watson. We wanted to see the crime scene. I know, brilliant. My dad was at work and my brother was with a friend, and this was 92 or 93, so no GPS, Alexa, Siri, or Google Earth, not even MapQuest. My dad was on our school board and had been given a highly detailed map of our entire county. Since neither of us knew how to reach Bone Road, it was agreed that the map would be our guide. We went home, grabbed the map, and set out like we were Magellan, and we eventually found the place and headed to the spot. Being the ignorant rubberneckers that we were, we just planned to drive past this stupid dump site. I can't explain how creepy this place was, though. A murder dump in the middle of BFE, on a road that started with blacktop, transitioned to gravel, and then good old dirt. It was mid-afternoon, but the sudden rain on the August ground made the area steamy. Literal steam was emanating from the road, the fields, the woods, and everywhere, and that just added to the thrill of our folly. And as we approached the location, there was a blind curve, making it impossible to see the place until we were right up on it. When we rounded that corner, we saw that we weren't alone. A very dirty man had his very dirty truck pulled over at the dump just far enough to allow us to pass. Sure, Joe Dirt could have been just another looky-loo like us, but he gave off a creepy vibe. Just standing by his truck, looking down into the dump site, it wasn't a sheriff's officer, and we know all our local authorities, and they had cleared the location a day or so before. Anyone could access the area. And as we squeezed past his truck, he was standing on the passenger side of our car. I'm 12 or 13, I can't drive, so he was on my side as we passed, so close to him that I could see his 2 teeth clear as day. He just smiled in his uber creeptastic, almost leering way, not nice and not friendly. We got past and thanked the Lord that Mr. Two-Tooth hadn't followed us, and we agreed that we could reach the end of Bone Road and just get the hell out of there. Oh, you know there's a but. We reached the end of Bone Road, ending at a field, and Bone Road was a dead end, no pun intended. My mom said the words that I had been screaming in my head. Oh, F. We had no choice. We had to do a 5-point turn to go back from where we came. Oh, I bet he's gone now, my mom's feeble attempt to soothe us both. And guess what? He was still there, still smiling his huge 2-tooth smile. And now as my adult self reflected on this, he could have come after us, knowing that we would be cornered, but neither of us have ever been accused of being too rational. We made it out unscathed, of course, and my dad hit the roof when he heard the tapestry of idiocy our afternoon adventure was. But you know there's always a but. Days later, our newspaper heralded the good news that murderer was caught. The woman had been killed by a boyfriend-turned-stalker. She had moved here from a town about 45 minutes away to get away from him, but he had found her. He just drove around with her body in his truck before happening upon this dump site. Happily ever after? Not quite. And as we stared down at this guy's mugshot, it was real. Mr. Two-Tooth was her killer. We never told my dad that part. Mr. Two-Tooth was convicted of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. He'll die in the state prison system serving life with no parole. Still, Mom and I promised that we would never be so dumb again. We still have weird adventures, but not to freaky remote murder dump sites on unknown terrain and with no one knowing where we are. We really could have met our literal dead end. It's an odd thing, knowing that you had been face to face with a brutal murderer, not once, but twice. I'm 22 years old. We used to have a neighbor who was around 60 to 70 years old, and he died a few years ago. When he was still alive, he would cause us so much trouble. Scratched our car, poisoned our apple trees and grass, blew up a firework near me to cause me to temporarily go deaf on one ear when I was like 4, all kinds of things. His son was a judge in our city, so pretty much everything we took to court was against us. And I remember Dad often called us from work to tell us not to be alone at home, and we would have to stay at Grandma's. When I was little, I think about 6 or 7, I would frequently have nightmares about seeing a face outside the bathroom window. The window is above our bathtub. It's high enough that no one can actually see in unless they climb the roof on our shed, which is underneath the bathroom window in our garden. Coincidentally, the shed is directly next to a fence that separates our garden from the neighbor's one. I still remember the dreams. I remember having them pretty much every other night, and I never told my parents when I was little because we never really talked about anything, so I didn't really share anything that was happening to me. Well, I grew up thinking that they were just dreams and that was it. I did mention them to my therapist last year because we were discussing some personal problems, and I felt like this was kind of connected. After coming home, Mom asked me what I talked about with my therapist, so I finally shared that I used to have such dreams. I never really thought about them being real, but she told me that I actually did tell her that I saw our neighbor on our shed's roof. I don't remember telling her that, but she said that I did mention it several times, and even my friends told her that they saw him there when they came over to our house and it really creeped them out. Apparently, I never mentioned him watching me in the shower. But after she told me that, it really clicked for me, and it was as if I suddenly remembered that, yeah, I do think it was him. It would make sense, and the fact that it happened still creeps me out. There was another incident that creeped me out too, and it happened when I was around 9 to 10. I went to the balcony in the evening, and the balcony door was in my room, and I often went there to call my cat home in the evening. But this time I saw a person standing in the middle of our garden. It was already dark out, and I couldn't really tell who it was. I waited for a little bit to see what the person does, but I didn't really see him move. It was as if he was just standing there and staring in front of him. I called out, "Dad?" because obviously I expected it to be him, even though I found it odd. But the person looked up at me, and even though it was dark, I could tell it was someone else. I think it was partly because my eyes had just adjusted to the dark, and I could make out the silhouette of the person better. And I went to tell my dad, who was downstairs, but when he looked, there was no one there. When I went back upstairs to my room and went to the balcony again, I noticed my neighbor's back door closing just when I looked there. I don't remember if it was directly the next day or a few days later, but our grass turned brown and we found out it was poisoned, most of the grass being out of reach from his property. My earliest memory of a nightmare turned out to be a real event. So that title sounds like a no-sleep story, and that's the first thing I thought when I first found this out about 2 months ago. I've been busy dealing with the wake of a family tragedy since then, but now that things are returning to the new normal, I figured it's a good time to share this, and I'm sorry in advance for any formatting issues here. Now first, I'll describe the nightmare. It's a very short dream. Like I said, it's a very clear memory just because of how scary it was. I was about 4 or 5 years old, perhaps 6 at the most, and my twin brother and I had a bunk bed in a room at the furthest end of the house that we grew up in. The nightmare had me in my bed looking out the window to see a red sky, the kind it gets in the early dawn hours before sunrise, but light still colors the sky. And the next and only other thing I remember in this nightmare is that a man with crazy blue-colored eyes and a bald head appears at the window and stares right at me. The nightmare ends there, but I remember just how much I screamed and screamed about it. I don't know where my brother was at the time when I woke up screaming, and the only thing I can remember from when I woke up was having my mom come and get me and calm me down as she took me to her bedroom down the hall. I remember that event so well because I wondered where my dad was at the time. Now fast forward to this May, and my father is in a hospital in Colombia, the country where he lives. My twin brother, our older sister, and I are staying in a hotel about a 5-minute walk from the hospital where he's in the ICU. One night, after a long day of being there for Dad and the extended family, my siblings and I return to the hotel, sit together to have a couple of beers, and try to relax after everything. We start discussing things, just trying to unwind, and somehow the topic of nightmares and dreams comes up. I bring up the story above, and without missing a beat, my sister explains that it really happened, that some guy really did look through my window and she remembers the whole thing. My sister, who is 5 years older than my brother and I, which would make her 9 or 10 years old at the time, had a bedroom adjacent to the room my brother and I shared. Her room faced our front lawn and the street, while our room faced the neighbor's house in their driveway, with a very low fence between the two houses. While she didn't go into too much detail about the days before this nightmare/event, she said that she had been followed by a bald man in a truck as she rode her bike home with some friends a couple of times before. The day immediately before this nightmare was no different, but this time the man actually drove right past the house. At the time, she was a latchkey kid since my brother and I had to attend a special school about 45 minutes away from our hometown for a speech impediment that many twins have, and my mom had to pick us up rather than be home for my sister's after school. However, she was never home alone for more than an hour. That afternoon and evening were pretty normal as she remembers it. My dad came home from his job. He worked part-time as a cop in a local hardware store, and we all had dinner, did homework, played, and did the usual family things before bed. That night, at around 12 to 1 a.m., this bald-headed man parked down the street at a small industrial park, walked up to our house, and tried to get in through my sister's window, which woke her up. She screamed when she saw the man nearly opening the window as it wasn't locked. My dad stormed in and tried to shove the guy out or hit him with his nightstick, and my sister doesn't remember exactly, which caused the man to run off. But he only stayed away for a short time before returning to try to get in through the window in my room. He tried opening the window, but it was locked because my mom didn't want my brother and me to open it, as our bed was right up against it. My sister said I screamed as loud as I could, and my mom came in to get my brother and me while my dad ran out the front door to chase the guy, but to no avail, as the man fled through our backyard. Our backyard was situated against a small rail yard, part of the aforementioned industrial park. Between our small neighborhood and that rail yard was a dense patch of trees that always made the backyards very dark, so my dad didn't want to risk being attacked there. And instead he went back inside and called the police, and then called our elderly neighbor to make sure that they were okay while our mom took care of us kids. This is all my sister could remember from that night herself, as this happened a very long time ago. Neither of us can recall anything else after that, and the story sort of just stops there. Unfortunately, my father passed away in the hospital, so we can't ask him about it. Given everything that's happened, none of us had thought to ask our mom yet, but maybe I'll ask her soon. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this and needed to get it off my chest. When I was about 16, my father, brothers, and I lived in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of my father. I was home alone one day. My dad and brothers went out somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, and I had my dog in a fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2, and we lived in the middle of nowhere, and there was a long driveway which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I couldn't see or hear anyone driving up the driveway. I saw a car, not my dad's, and kind of immediately freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house and turned off all the lights and checked the doors, making sure that they were locked. It was our landlord. He lived next door about 2 miles from our house, and yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time that he'd come here unexpectedly. It happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times he was only there for 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving, but this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going crazy and barking, and I heard him yell, "Shut up, you mutt." And I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the front door, and I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad, and he was coming straight home, but they'd be like an hour. He continued to walk around the outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors that you can enter from the outside, and he tried to open all 3. I thought maybe that he didn't know that I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were just a coincidence, but he started saying things, including calling out my name, and he knew that I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly creeped through the house following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying, and that's when he said something that I'll never forget. "I'm gonna burn this house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more. He wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take his threat seriously. And that's the part that gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least a half an hour, maybe closer to an hour, and he was very persistent, and he left before my dad came home. I told him everything, and we moved out soon after. I still don't know how he knew that I was home alone, and my dad never saw him on the way driving out, so he knew my dad was gone because there was no car in the driveway. But how did he know I wasn't with him? And why did he act like that?